The rain struck the towering stained glass windows of the obsidian High Council chamber like handfuls of shattered glass. It was a vicious storm, cold and unforgiving, perfectly matching the atmosphere brewing inside the great hall of the Silver Pine Kingdom. Tonight, the pack was not gathering for a war council. They were gathering for a public betrayal. A deafening cheer erupted from the 30 lords of the Northern Territories, their voices echoing off the polished black marble walls. Queen Elara sat perfectly motionless upon the carved wooden throne. Her hands rested gently, deliberately, on the folds of her midnight blue velvet gown. To the untrained eye, she was a statue of flawless royal dignity. But beneath the heavy fabric, her fingernails dug deep crescent moons into her own palms. The mate bond, a silver crescent mark burned into the skin of her collarbone, throbbed with a sickening, toxic heat. It was the agonizing physical manifestation of a severed promise. Standing at the center of the dais, mere feet away, was Alpha King Valerius. He wore his ceremonial ash-grey wolf pelt draped over battle-worn silver armor. His presence alone demanded absolute submission. His aura, a suffocating wave of frost pine and wood smoke, pressed heavily against the chests of every wolf in the room, forcing the weaker lords to lower their heads instinctively. For 5 years, Elara had ruled beside him. She had stabilized his economy. She had bled to secure his borders, but she carried one unforgivable flaw in the eyes of the Silver Pine court. She had not produced an heir. Valerius raised a gauntleted hand. The cheers of the council died instantly, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. Beside him stood Lady Livia. She wore a delicate, unearned silver crown and a gown of spun ivory silk that clung tightly to the undeniable swell of her pregnant stomach. Livia rested both hands protectively over her belly, her chin tilted upward. "My loyal lords," Valerius spoke. His voice was a low, resonant rumble that shook the obsidian floorboards. "A kingdom without a future is a kingdom waiting to be devoured. For too long, the shadow of a barren reign has threatened our borders. We have prayed for a blessing. The moon has finally answered." He turned slightly, his storm-grey eyes dragging toward Elara. There was no apology in his gaze, hesitation. There was only the ruthless, chilling calculus of a ruler who believed his legacy was worth destroying his soulmate. "Tonight, I present to you the strength of our bloodline," Valerius declared, placing his large, scarred hand over Livia's stomach. "Lady Livia carries the next Alpha of the North." Another roar of approval went up from the council. Lord Montgomery, a wealthy opportunist, raised his goblet high, averting his eyes from the true Luna. Livia leaned into the king's side. She cast a brief, sidelong glance at Elara. Her lips curved into a smile that dripped with synthetic pity. It was the smile of a thief who believed she had won the crown. Elara did not flinch. She did not weep. The white wolf inside her mind, once fiercely protective of her mate, had gone completely, terrifyingly silent. The pain in her collarbone was blinding, but Elara forced herself to take a slow, measured breath. Wolves relied on their instincts just as much as their logic, and Elara, the last true daughter of the Winter Moon bloodline, possessed senses far sharper than any lord in the room. As Valeria stood close to Livia, the heat of the packed hall amplified the sense on the dais. Livia smelled of heavy, cloying rose perfume. It was sweet, masking, and desperate. But Elara was not focusing on the mistress. She focused her senses deeper. She sought the underlying amniotic essence, the faint, undeniable scent of the unborn pup seeping through the mother's pores. If the child belonged to the Alpha King, it would carry the sharp, cold bite of frost pine. Elara breathed it in. There was no pine. There was no smoke. The scent of the unborn child was damp earth and rusted iron. Elara's luminous amber eyes locked onto Livia's swollen belly. Her heart, which had been fracturing under the weight of the public humiliation, suddenly went perfectly still. Damp earth and rusted iron. That was not the scent of a royal bloodline. That was the scent of the eastern marshlands. It was the scent of a lesser, impoverished lord. The Alpha King was risking his entire kingdom, breaking the sacred pack laws and publicly discarding his fated mate, all to crown a bastard child that did not even belong to him. The tears Elara had refused to shed evaporated entirely. The phantom pain of the rejection began to recede, replaced by an empowering, icy numbness. The tragedy of the rejected mate was over. The trial of the sovereign queen had just begun. The silence in the obsidian High Council chamber was thick enough to choke on. 30 lords held their collective breath, their gazes darting between the pregnant mistress on the dais and the true Luna sitting in the shadows of the wooden throne. They expected a breakdown. A scorned female wolf was a dangerous, volatile creature. They waited for the hysterical begging, the violent shifting of bones, or the desperate pleas of a mate whose bond was being publicly shredded.
The time is upon us.
"I only wish to serve the realm, Your Majesty," Livia murmured. Her voice was pitched perfectly to carry across the quiet hall, laced with an unnatural, sugary sweetness. She stroked her stomach, her eyes locking onto Elara. "I know how heavily your shortcomings have weighed on the king's heart. I only want to heal the silver pine." Beside her, Alpha King Valerius shifted his weight. The heavy ash-grey wolf pelt settled over his broad shoulders. His storm-grey eyes were guarded, watching Elara with a mixture of rigid authority and a faint, almost imperceptible trace of guilt. He braced his jaw, waiting for her to break. Elara did not break. Deep within the confines of her mind, her white wolf, the proud, ancient spirit of the winter moon bloodline, did not thrash against the cages of rejection. It did not howl in agony over the burning crescent mark on their collarbone. Instead, the wolf sat perfectly still, its golden eyes turning cold and dark. It watched the Alpha King not as a mate, but as a liability. Slowly, Elara stood. There was no rush, no trembling in her limbs. The heavy midnight blue velvet of her gown rustled against the obsidian floor, a sharp, elegant sound that sliced through the tension in the room. The lords nearest the dais, including the opportunistic Lord Montgomery, instinctively took a half-step backward. They did not retreat out of pity. They retreated because the air around Elara suddenly smelled sharply of ozone, the terrifying scent of a brewing storm. She did not look at Livia. A lioness does not acknowledge a scav. Danger. Elara's luminous amber eyes locked solely onto Valerius. The Alpha King's brow furrowed. He stepped forward, his frost pine aura flaring as if to shield his mistress from a physical blow. "Elara," Valerius began, his voice a low warning rumble. "Step down with dignity. Do not make this harder than it." Elara raised a single slender hand. It was a gesture so effortlessly commanding, so deeply ingrained with years of absolute sovereign authority, that Valerius actually snapped his mouth shut. The Alpha King of the North, a man who commanded armies with a whisper, was silenced by the flick of his discarded mate's wrist. "A king must do what is best for his legacy," Elara spoke. Her voice was neither loud nor frantic. It was a smooth, lethal blade of sound that carried to the farthest corners of the hall. She looked at the scarred face of the man she had bled for, severing the emotional tether between them with sheer, brutal willpower. Her gaze dropped for a fraction of a second to Livia's stomach, acknowledging the scent of damp earth and rusted iron that only she could smell. "May the moon grant your reign exactly the bloodline it deserves." Valerius stiffened. A sudden, inexplicable chill ran down his spine, settling deep into his chest where the mate bond lay. The words felt less like a surrender and more like a curse. Without waiting for his dismissal, Elara turned her back on the throne. She gathered the heavy folds of her blood-red cloak and walked down the center aisle of the great hall. She did not lower her head. She did not hurry. As she moved, the heavy crowd of powerful, hardened warlords parted for her in absolute silence. No one dared to meet her amber eyes. The massive iron-studded oak doors were pulled open by the royal guards, who immediately bowed their heads in deep, unwavering respect to the only queen they had ever known. The doors shut with a heavy, final thud, sealing Valerius inside with his cheering sycophants and his pregnant mistress. Outside in the dimly lit corridor, the cold draft of the castle washed over Elara. The burning in her collarbone was a dull, constant ache, but her mind was operating at a terrifying, singular speed. She had a bastard to expose, a treason to prove, and an Alpha King to dethrone. She had work to do. The stone walls of the Queen's private wing were notoriously drafty, but Elara felt no cold. The heavy oak door locked behind her with a definitive metallic click, isolating her from the sprawling expanse of the silver pine stronghold. For the first time since Valerius had crowned his mistress, she was entirely alone. She unfastened the silver clasp of her blood-red cloak, letting the heavy fabric pool onto the stone floor. She walked methodically toward the silver wash basin in the corner of the room. Pouring freezing water from an iron pitcher, she submerged a rough linen cloth. The crescent mark on her collarbone, the physical brand of her fated bond to Valerius, was burning with a toxic, rhythmic throbbing. It was the magic of the pack trying to reconcile the rejection, screaming at her to submit, to weep, to beg for her Alpha's favor. Elara did not submit. She pressed the freezing, coarse cloth against her collarbone and scrubbed. She scrubbed aggressively, dragging the rough linen over the sensitive skin until it was raw, red, and stinging with physical pain. The sharp surface ache grounded her, overriding the deep spiritual poison of the severed bond. She dropped the damp cloth into the basin. The water rippled, reflecting her own amber eyes back at her. They were not the eyes of a broken woman. They were the eyes of a predator analyzing a battlefield. Something had been profoundly wrong in the great hall. Werewolves relied on their primal senses just as heavily as their logic, and Elara possessed the sharpest nose in the Northern Territories. When Valerius had placed his hand on Livia's stomach, Elara had been close enough to catch the complex, layered blend of scents. Livia smelled of crushed roses and milk, the typical, heavily perfumed scent of a pregnant female trying to mask her changing biology. But the underlying scent of the unborn pup, the faintest trace of amniotic essence that seeped through the mother's pores, had not belonged to the king. It had smelled of damp earth and rusted iron. "Commander Gideon," Elara spoke quietly into the shadows of her chamber. From the darkened alcove near the heavy velvet curtains, a massive figure detached himself. Gideon, the commander of the Queen's personal guard, stepped into the flickering candlelight. He was a terrifying sight, a veteran scarred from countless border wars, but his loyalty was not to the throne. He had sworn his blood oath to the Wintermoon bloodline long before Elara had ever met Valerius. "My queen," Gideon rumbled, bowing his head deeply. His massive fists were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with suppressed fury. He had stood guard outside the council doors. He knew what had happened. "Say the word. I will gather our loyalists. I will tear the king's throat out myself. The true pack will follow you." "No," Elara said, waving a hand dismissively. She moved toward her mahogany writing desk, her midnight blue velvet gown whispering against the stone. "Treason by the blade is a clumsy affair, Gideon. It divides the pack. It breeds civil war. Let Valerius dig his own grave." She sat in the high-backed leather chair, her posture impeccably straight. "I need you to hunt, my friend. Not with a sword, but with shadows," she instructed, her voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous register. "I caught a scent on Lady Livia tonight. Damp earth and rusted iron. It does not belong to my husband. I need to know whose bed she was warming before she decided to play a royal paramour." Gideon's dark eyes narrowed as his strategic mind caught up to her logic. "The eastern marshlands," he muttered. "Lord Bastion's territory borders the old iron mines. His scent profile matches your description. He is also known for his crippling gambling debts and a reckless appetite for court women." Elara paused, her fingers gently drumming against the polished wood of the desk. Bastion, a bankrupt lord from a minor house. If Livia, a desperate social climber, had gotten herself pregnant by a penniless fool, passing the child off as the Alpha King's heir would be the ultimate play for absolute wealth and power. "A cuckoo's egg in the royal nest," Gideon growled, the sheer audacity of the crime making his wolf bristle. "Find the proof, Gideon," Elara ordered, her amber eyes flashing in the dim light. "I do not want rumors. I want dates, times, and witnesses. Bribe the tavern keepers on the edge of the capital. Threaten Bastion's couriers. Find the letters she must have sent him. Do whatever you must, but bring me the truth." "It will be done, my queen," Gideon said. He offered a final, reverent bow before slipping out through the secret servant's door, melting into the stormy night like a phantom. Elara remained at her desk, the raw skin of her collarbone a dull ache. She pulled out a blank piece of thick parchment and a raven feather quill. The pack had cheered for a lie. Soon, she would give them a truth they could not survive. For the next 3 weeks, The stronghold of the Silver Pine was a masterclass in psychological warfare and polemical illusion. Valerius wasted no time elevating his unborn heir. Lady Livia was moved into the lavish, sun-drenched suites of the West Wing, chambers historically reserved for the Queen Mother. She paraded through the castle corridors, flanked by royal guards, her delicate silver crown catching the torchlight, demanding the absolute deference of the castle servants. She openly flaunted the gifts showered upon her from the royal treasury, silks from the southern ports, emeralds and spiced wines. The court whispered. Lords who had once sought Elara's strategic counsel now averted their eyes when they passed her in the stone hallways, quickly betting their political futures on the mistress and her unborn child. Yet, for all his public pride, Alpha King Valerius was fighting a quiet, unseen war within his own body. He sat in his war room late one evening, staring blankly at a map of the borderlands. His broad chest ached with a hollow, pervasive numbness. The silver crescent mark on his neck, once a vibrant symbol of his fated connection to Elara, had turned dull and grey. His ash-grey wolf, normally a creature of decisive action, paced restlessly in the back of his mind. It refused to sleep. It refused to settle. When Valerius held Livia, seeking comfort in the woman carrying his supposed legacy, his wolf would recoil. It felt no instinct to protect the child. Valerius gritted his teeth, blaming the sensation on the stress of the impending border wars and the unnatural severing of his mate bond. He had made a king's choice. The emptiness in his chest was simply the price of a future. While Livia basked in the sunlight of the West Wing, Queen Elara buried herself in the shadows. She did not pack her bags. She did not flee to her ancestral lands in tears. Instead, Elara spent her days in the cold, windowless depths of the forbidden archives beneath the castle. The air here smelled of crumbling parchment, dried ink and ancient dust. She sat at a long, scarred oak table, a single silver candelabra illuminating the massive leather-bound tomes spread before her. She wore a simple, unadorned black gown, her pale blonde hair tied back tightly. The raw skin on her collarbone had healed into a faint, thin pink line, a physical reminder of the night she had chosen clarity over grief. Across the table sat Elder Kenrich. The ancient, blind wolf was the keeper of the pack law, a living artifact who had served 3 generations of Alpha Kings. His milky white eyes stared blankly at the flickering candle flame. "You seek a ghost, little bird," Elder Kenrich wheezed, his gnarled fingers tapping lightly against the wooden table. "The modern council cares nothing for the old ways. They follow the sword, the coin, and the promise of an heir." "The council will follow the law when they have no other choice," Elara replied. Her voice was smooth and utterly calm as she carefully turned a brittle page of a book dating back to the first Winter Moon Queen. "The covenant of the Silver Pine was forged in blood, Kenrich. It cannot be overwritten by a desperate king and a cheering crowd. An alpha may take a second mate if his Luna is proven barren." The old wolf recited the harsh, archaic law, his voice trembling slightly. "It is a cruel decree, my queen, but it is legal. You cannot strip him of his crown simply because he took the girl to his bed." "I am well aware of his infidelities," Elara stated, her amber eyes scanning the dense, archaic text. She felt no jealousy, only the cold precision of a surgeon finding the exact spot to cut. "But I am not looking for the laws of marriage, Elder." Kenrich tilted his head, his highly attuned ears catching the dangerous shift in her tone. "Then what do you seek in the dark?" Elara stopped turning the pages. Her finger rested on a passage written in faded crimson ink. The white wolf within her, silent for weeks, suddenly stirred, its golden eyes locking onto the ancient words. "I seek the consequences," Elara said softly, her voice carrying the chill of a winter storm. "Tell me, Kenrich, what does the Covenant say about an alpha who taints the royal bloodline? What is the penalty for a king who forces his pack to bow to a cuckoo's egg?" At the mention of a cuckoo's egg, Elder Kenrich went incredible. "We still." The only sound in the dusty confines of the forbidden archives was the sputtering hiss of the silver candelabra and the distant, muffled howling of the wind outside the castle walls. "Treason," the old wolf finally whispered. His voice trembled, a mixture of profound awe and deep-seated terror. His milky white eyes widened, as if he could suddenly see the catastrophic storm Elara was quietly summoning. "The law of false blood," Kenrich recited, his gnarled hands gripping the edge of the oak table. "It is the most ancient, most unforgiving decree of the Covenant. Lepak magic demands absolute purity of the royal line. If an Alpha King knowingly or foolishly forces his pack to bow to a false heir, he breaks the sacred tether that binds his soul to the kingdom." Elara traced the faded crimson ink on the brittle page. "And the penalty?" "Absolute ruin," Kenrich breathed. "The pack magic will judge him guilty of treason against his own bloodline. The true Luna, provided she can present undeniable proof of the deception, is granted the divine right of immediate severance. She keeps her ancestral lands, her dowry, and half the royal treasury. And the Alpha," Kenrich swallowed hard, "he is disgraced. The magic strips him of his absolute dominance. He becomes a king in name only, a shell of his former power." Elara smiled. It was a sharp, feral expression that did not quite reach her amber eyes. It was the smile of a trap snapping shut. She carefully closed the heavy leather-bound tome. "Than. Thank you, Elder Kenrich. You have served the realm perfectly." Hours later, the midnight storm was still raging when Elara returned to her private chambers. She stood by the roaring fireplace, watching the flames dance across the stone hearth. The secret servant's door groaned open. Commander Gideon slipped into the room, bringing with him the sharp scent of freezing rain, horse sweat, and wet iron. He looked exhausted, his heavy cloak drenched, but his dark eyes were burning with a fierce, triumphant light. He crossed the room and tossed a small, heavy velvet pouch onto Elara's mahogany desk. It landed with a soft, satisfying thud. "Lord Bastian is a fool of the highest order," Gideon scoffed, peeling off his wet leather gloves. "He kept every single correspondence. He had them hidden beneath the loose floorboards of his estate, likely hoping to use them to blackmail Lady Livia once she secured the crown and the treasury." Elara stepped up to the desk. She untied the velvet strings and tipped the pouch over. 5 thick envelopes spilled onto the polished wood. Even over the smell of the rain and the fireplace, the sickeningly sweet, heavy perfume of crushed roses drifted into the air. "And the medical timeline?" Elara asked, her voice deadly calm as she picked up the first letter. "Exactly as you suspected, my queen," Gideon reported, standing tall. "My men intercepted the old midwife in the Low, a village." Under a bit of heavy persuasion, she confirmed she secretly examined Lady Livia in the eastern marshlands. Livia was already showing signs of pregnancy 5 months ago. Elara's eyes flicked up to meet her commander's. Valerius only returned from the frozen border campaign 4 months ago. "The math does not align, my queen," Gideon said, a low, dangerous growl vibrating in his chest. "It is physically and medically impossible for the king to be the sire. The child belongs to Bastian." Elara slid the letters out of their envelopes. They were written in Livia's own elegant, looping handwriting. She read the desperate words, the passionate trysts in the marshlands, the panic when Livia realized her moon cycle was late, and the calculated, treasonous plan to seduce the Alpha King the moment he returned from the war to cover Bastian's tracks. It was all there, undeniable, perfect. Elara set the letters down neatly in a row. She reached into the drawer of her desk and pulled out a fresh, thick piece of ancient parchment, the kind reserved strictly for royal decrees. "Tomorrow at dawn, Valerius holds the Grand Council meeting to officially sign the decree of succession," Elara said, her tone devoid of any mercy. She picked up her raven feather quill. "Every lord of the northern territories will be present in the obsidian chamber to pledge their lives to this false heir." "They will walk into a slaughter," Gideon murmured. "No, Gideon," Elara corrected softly, dipping her quill into the black ink. "They will walk into the truth." The scratch of the raven feather quill against the thick parchment was the only sound in the dimly lit chamber. Elara's hand moved with absolute, fluid precision. She was not writing a letter of heartbreak, nor was she drafting a plea for the Alpha King's mercy. She was writing an execution order for a 5-year reign. She transcribed the ancient text of the covenant directly from memory. She invoked the law of false blood, listing the undeniable medical contradictions and citing the treasonous deception against the pack magic. She claimed her ancestral dowry, the eastern territories of the winter moon, and exactly half of the silver pine treasury. Finally, she reached the bottom of the parchment. She wrote her title not as the mate of Valerius, but as Elara, true sovereign of the north. She set the quill down. She reached for the stick of crimson wax and held it over the open flame of the candle. As the wax melted, dripping like heavy drops of blood onto the bottom of the document, the thin pink line on her collarbone gave one final, weak throb. It was as if the severed mate bond could sense its impending, absolute death. Elara felt nothing but cold resolve. She picked up her heavy silver queen seal, the crest of the white wolf, and pressed it firmly into the pool of hot crimson wax. It was done. The divorce papers were ready. She folded the heavy parchment and slipped it into the velvet pouch alongside Livia's perfumed letters. She did not sleep that night. She sat by the dying embers of the fire, her mind a fortress of strategy, calculating every variable of the morning to come. When dawn broke, the violent storm had finally passed, leaving the air biting and crisp. The morning light filtering through the high windows was pale and unforgiving. Elara did not wear the midnight blue velvet from the night of her humiliation. Today, she dressed for war. She wore her ancestral riding leathers, reinforced with dark silver plating. Over her shoulders, she fastened her heavy, blood-red velvet cloak, securing it with the crest of her own noble house, entirely devoid of the silver pine insignia. Her pale blonde hair was braided tight against her skull. She looked like a blade drawn from its sheath. She stepped out of her private chambers into the stone corridor. Commander Gideon was already waiting, flanked by a dozen of the Queen's elite guards. They were wolves who had sworn their lives to Elara's strategic mind, not Valerius's brute strength. "The council is assembling, my queen," Gideon reported, falling into step beside her as they marched down the long, shadowed hallway toward the Great Hall. All 30 lords of the Northern Territories are present. King Valerius and Lady Livia have already taken the dais. "Are the perimeter guards in place?" Elara asked, her boots echoing sharply against the stone. "I personally selected the interior detail for today's ceremony," Gideon confirmed, his hand resting casually but menacingly on the pommel of his broadsword. "They answer only to you." "Good," Elara said. They reached the massive, iron-studded double doors of the obsidian High Council chamber. Even through the thick wood, she could hear the boastful laughter of the lords, the clinking of expensive spiced wine goblets, and the underlying nervous musk of politicians eager to secure their place in the new regime. Elara stopped just short of the archway. She turned to Gideon, her amber eyes glowing with a terrifying, luminescent authority. "When I enter, you will wait exactly 30 seconds, Elara commanded, her voice dropping or deadly whisper. "Then you will throw the deadbolts, lock the heavy doors from the inside." Gideon's scarred face broke into a grim, predatory smile. He understood perfectly. "No one leaves." "No one," Elara confirmed, her hand brushing the velvet pouch hidden beneath her red cloak. "Today, the Council wishes to pledge their lives to a lie. We are going to ensure they look the truth dead in the eye." Elara squared her shoulders, the scent of ozone and impending storm flaring violently around her. She reached out and pushed the heavy oak doors open. Sunlight poured through the massive stained glass windows of the obsidian High Council chamber, casting fractured patterns of crimson and gold across the polished black floor. It was a beautiful, clear morning for a treasonous coronation. 30 of the most powerful lords and barons of the Northern Territories were seated around the massive circular oak table in the center of the hall. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, expensive spiced wine, and the underlying nervous musk of politicians about to make a monumental shift in allegiance. Alpha King Valerius stood at the head of the table, looking every inch the victorious conqueror. Seated immediately to his right, in a gilded chair that was entirely inappropriate for a mere mistress, was Lady Livia. She played the part of the radiant, pregnant savior perfectly, her hands continuously stroking her swollen belly, drawing every eye in the room to the supposed royal heir. At the center of the oak table lay the decree of succession. "Lords of the North," Valerius's voice resonated, vibrating with the commanding frequency that instinctively forced lesser wolves to lower their heads. "We are gathered to ink a new chapter in the history of the Silver Pine. Today, you will sign this decree, officially recognizing the child Lady Livia carries as the undisputed heir to the Alpha throne." Lord Montgomery, ever eager to secure favor, was the first to reach for the feathered quill. "It is a blessing from the moon, my king. A strong bloodline ensures a strong border." "Indeed," Valerius agreed, his chest swelling with pride. "Let the signing commence." Before Montgomery's quill could even touch the parchment, the heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall swung wide open. The sudden draft of cold air snuffed out half the torches along the walls. Queen Elara stepped over the threshold. Exactly 30 seconds later, Commander Gideon pulled the heavy doors shut. A massive metallic slam echoed through the chamber. The grinding sound of the exterior iron deadbolts sliding into place caused several lords to jump to their feet, their heavy wooden chairs scraping violently against the obsidian floor. "What is the meaning of this?" Valerius bellowed. His alpha aura flared instantly, filling the room with the oppressive scent of furious frost pine and wood smoke. "Guards, remove the Queen from this chamber. She has no place at this council." None of the perimeter guards moved. They stood like stone statues, their spears planted firmly against the floor. Gideon had personally selected the interior detail. They did not answer to the king. They answered to the bloodline of the winter moon. Elara walked forward, her boots echoing in the sudden, suffocating silence of the room. She did not wear the subdued silks of a discarded mate. Clad in her ancestral dark riding leathers and a blood-red velvet cloak, she looked like a sovereign marching to war. She did not flinch against Valerius's alpha command. Instead, her own royal aura flared to match his, a wave of crushing, icy ozone that smelled of a breaking storm. The atmospheric pressure in the room shifted so violently that the wine in the Lord's goblets trembled. "I have every right to be here, Valerius," Elara said, her voice projecting effortlessly over the murmurs of the panicked council.
I understand.
"As the anointed Luna of this territory, I am bound by the sacred covenant to protect the silver pine from foreign threats." Livia let out a dramatic, breathless gasp, clutching Valerius's arm. "My king, she insults me. She brings weapons to a peaceful ceremony." "Silence your whore, Valerius, before I have Gideon cut out her tongue," Elara snapped. The sheer, unapologetic ferocity in her tone made Livia physically recoil. Even Valerius took a half-step back, his storm-grey eyes widening in shock. This was not the quiet, supportive diplomat he had ruled with for 5 years. This was an apex predator. Elara reached the edge of the circular oak table. She rested her hands on the polished wood, her amber eyes locking onto the trembling Lord Montgomery, who was still holding the feathered quill. "You are all so eager to sign your names and pledge your lives to an heir." Elara addressed the 30 lords, her voice dripping with dangerous authority. "But I ask you, wardens of the North, have any of you bothered to verify the bloodline you are swearing fealty to?" "The king has claimed the child, Your Majesty," Lord Montgomery stammered, sweating profusely. "It is not our place to question." "It is exactly your place," Elara's voice cracked like a whip. "You owe your loyalty to the true blood of the silver pine, not to a cuckoo's egg placed in the royal nest by a desperate social climber." Alpha King Valerius lunged forward, his massive hands slamming onto the oak table. The wood groaned under his weight. His storm-grey eyes flashed with the brilliant, dangerous gold of his inner wolf. "You have crossed the line, Elara," Valerius roared, his voice shaking the stained glass windows. The scent of frost pine turned sharp and suffocating, a warning of imminent violence. "You dare accuse me of tainting the royal bloodline. I will strip you of your title and banish you to the frozen wastelands for this insolence. You will leave this hall immediately." "I will do no such thing," Elara countered, her voice dropping to a deadly even register. She did not flinch. She did not raise a weapon. The sheer authority radiating from her frozen posture stopped the Alpha King in his tracks. For a fleeting second, the grey, faded mark on Valerius's neck pulsed with a dull ache, a sudden, terrifying reminder from his wolf that the woman standing before him was not a rogue to be discarded, but the true sovereign of the North. Livia, sensing the shift in the room's energy, began to weep softly. She clung to Valerius's arm, burying her face against his heavy silver armor. "My king, please," she sobbed, "do not let her speak such vile lies about our child. She is blinded by jealousy. She wants to destroy what she cannot give you." "Lies," Elara repeated, the word rolling off her tongue with icy disdain. She reached beneath her blood-red cloak and withdrew the heavy velvet pouch. With a swift, deliberate motion, she untied the strings and overturned it right in the center of the massive oak table. 5 thick parchment envelopes cascaded across the polished wood. They landed directly on top of the unsigned decree of succession. Immediately, the heavy, cloying scent of crushed roses filled the space around the table. It was the exact same perfume Lady Livia wore to mask her scent, but beneath the floral notes, the sharp noses of the northern lords could detect the faint, musky signature of another male wolf. "Read them," Elara commanded, sweeping her gaze across the 30 lords of the council. "Letters written by Lady Livia's own hand, sent to Lord Bastian of the Eastern Marshlands." Valerius froze, his jaw locked, his eyes darting down to the scattered envelopes. "They detail their passionate trysts in the swamps," Elara continued, her voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "They detail the exact dates she visited his estate, and most importantly, they detail her sudden, desperate need to seduce the Alpha King immediately after realizing her moon cycle was late. She knew she carried a bankrupt lord's bastard, and she brought it here to steal a crown. The color completely drained from Livia's face. She looked as though she had seen a ghost. Her hands began to tremble violently, her fingers slipping from Valerius's arm. "Read them, Valerius," Elara challenged, staring directly into the king's eyes. "Or are you too much of a coward to see whose bed she left before she came to yours?" Lord Montgomery, seated closest to the letters, hesitantly reached out and turned one of the envelopes over. His eyes widened as he recognized the broken wax seal of Lord Bastian's minor house. "It's a trick!" Livia suddenly shrieked. Her carefully crafted facade of the gentle, fragile Muv shattered into pieces. She lunged forward, desperately trying to sweep the letters off the table. But Commander Gideon stepped forward, his massive, scarred hand coming down hard on the oak, blocking her. Livia recoiled, sobbing hysterically. "They are forgeries! She paid someone to write them. She is a barren, bitter woman trying to ruin my life." Elara simply watched the mistress unravel with cold, clinical detachment. The panic in Livia's voice was a confession in itself, but Elara knew that the pride of an Alpha King was a stubborn beast. Letters could be denied. Handwriting could be debated. "Forgeries?" Elara asked smoothly, her amber eyes turning back to Valerius, who was staring at the letters with a dawning, horrifying realization. Very well. If the written word is not enough to convince the Silver Pine Court. Elara turned toward the heavy oak doors, where Commander Gideon stood guard. Let us consult the science of the pack. Step forward, Dr. Richard Caldwell. A collective murmur erupted among the lords as Dr. Richard Caldwell stepped out from the shadowed archway. The elderly human physician had served the Silver Pine royals for 3 generations. His reputation for absolute clinical neutrality was legendary across the Northern Territories. He did not care about pack politics, bloodlines, or alpha authority. He cared only for anatomy and truth. His mere presence immediately lent an undeniable, terrifying credibility to Elara's claims. Dr. Caldwell, Elara prompted gently, her posture remaining impeccable. Please, share your medical findings with the council. The old doctor cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles as he pulled a small leather-bound ledger from his coat. The High Council chamber fell dead silent. Even Livia stopped sobbing, her breath catching in her throat like a trapped animal. My lords, King Valerius, Dr. Caldwell began, his voice dry and clinical. Under the Queen's orders, I was granted access to the old apothecary records from the eastern marshlands, specifically the ledgers of a midwife who treated Lady Livia. Valerius stared at the old man, his chest heaving heavily. The oppressive scent of frost pine had stalled, replaced by the sharp, acrid stench of a wolf's rising panic. I found the consultation record matching Lady Livia's exact description, Caldwell continued, reading from his notes. She sought tonics for morning sickness 5 months ago. The doctor lowered his ledger and looked directly at the Alpha King. As the council is well aware, King Valerius was undeniably stationed at the frozen border until exactly 4 months ago. The gestation timeline is medically and physically impossible. The Alpha King is not the sire of the child Lady Livia carries. The silence that followed was not just quiet. It was a total vacuum of sound. The math did not align. The truth was laid bare on the obsidian floor, stripped of all romance and illusion. The child was a bastard. The crown was a lie. The entire kingdom had just cheered for the offspring of a bankrupt gamble lord. Valerius turned his head slowly. The motion was mechanical, as if his joints had turned to rusted iron. He looked down at Livia. The grey wolf inside his mind, the primal beast that had blindly craved an heir, suddenly realized the monumental scale of the betrayal. The fragile, instinctual bond he had tried to force toward the unborn pup shattered into nothingness. Livia, Valerius whispered. His voice was dangerously low, a dark rumble that vibrated through the stone floor. Tell me the human lies. Livia burst into fresh, hysterical tears. She sank to her knees, the heavy ivory silk of her gown pooling around her on the black marble. She desperately reached out, grabbing the edge of Valerius's silver armor. "Valerius, please!" she begged, her facade completely destroyed. "I love you. Lord Bastion meant nothing. It was before you returned from the war. I was so afraid you wouldn't want me if I was barren. I only wanted to give you what the Queen could not." She didn't get to finish. Valerius unleashed a deafening roar. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated devastation and misplaced rage. His claws violently extended. He slammed both his fists down onto the center of the massive circular oak table. With a deafening crack, the ancient wood splintered and gave way. The table completely collapsed in half, sending the decree of succession, the wine goblets, and Bastian's perfumed letters scattering across the floor. The lords of the north scrambled backward in terror, tripping over their heavy chairs to get away from the explosive fury of a deceived Alpha. Several lords half-shifted, their eyes glowing as their survival instincts kicked in against their king's blind rage. Valerius stood breathing heavily, his broad chest heaving, his claws gouging deep trenches into the ruined wood of the table. He looked down at Livia, who was cowering on the floor, weeping uncontrollably. The illusion of his legacy was dead. Then, Valerius slowly looked up. His storm-grey eyes found Elara. She had not moved a single inch. She had not flinched when the table shattered. She stood tall in her blood-red cloak, her amber eyes watching him with absolute, freezing indifference. The sheer magnitude of what he had thrown away crashed into Valerius like an avalanche. He had discarded a brilliant political strategist, a fearless sovereign, and his fated true mate, all for the illusion of a traitor's bastard. Elara, Valerius rasped, the fury in his voice immediately giving way to a profound, crushing desperation. He took a hesitant step toward her, extending a trembling hand. My queen, you uncovered this treason. You saved the crown. Do not take another step toward me, Elara warned. Her voice was devoid of any warmth, carrying the absolute chill of a winter glacier. She did not raise a weapon. She didn't need to. The sheer, freezing authority radiating from her posture stopped the Alpha King dead in his tracks. Valerius stared at her, his broad shoulders slumping as the reality of his catastrophic mistake set in. Around them, the 30 lords of the Northern Territories watched in stunned, breathless silence, stepping over the splinters of the ruined oak table. Livia's hysterical sobbing echoed pitifully in the background, but Valerius did not even look down at the mistress who had ruined him. I will execute Bastian, Valerius swore, his storm-grey eyes pleading with a desperation Elara had never seen in him. I will throw this treacherous woman into the deepest dungeons of the Silver Pine. We can rebuild, Elara. We can purge this treason. You are my queen. You are my Luna. I was your Luna, Elara corrected, her tone cutting through the chamber like shattered glass. When you broke the sacred covenant of our bond by demanding this pack bow to false blood, you forfeited your right to my loyalty. You forfeited your right to lead me. She reached into the velvet pouch hidden beneath her blood-red cloak. Slowly, she withdrew the thick, ancient parchment bearing the heavy crimson wax seal of the Winter Moon bloodline, the Writ of Severance. She walked deliberately toward Valerius, her boots crunching over the splintered wood. Never in modern history had a Luna invoked the law of false blood against a sitting king. Elara stopped mere inches from the massive Alpha. She looked up into his desperate, agonizing eyes, feeling absolutely nothing. The phantom ache of the mate mark on her collarbone had vanished entirely, replaced by an electrifying, sovereign clarity. That child is not your heir, Elara whispered, her words razor-sharp. And neither am I your mate. She held out the heavy parchment. The moment Valerius's trembling fingers instinctively brushed the document, the magic of the ancient pack law activated. A blinding, ethereal flash of silver light erupted between them, filling the room with the explosive scent of ozone and burning storm clouds. Valerius let out an agonizing, guttural scream. He fell to his knees as if he had been struck by lightning. The spiritual severing of a fated mate bond was excruciating under normal circumstances. But when invoked through the ultimate betrayal of the Covenant, the retribution of the Pack's magic was merciless. The faded grey crescent scar on Valerius's neck blistered, turning pitch black before fading completely into smooth, unmarked skin. The telepathic web that connected an Alpha to his Luna snapped violently. Every lord in the room gasped, clutching their chests as the shockwave of the broken bond rippled through the hierarchy of the Silver Pine. They could feel it in their own blood. The king was suddenly diminished. His oppressive frost pine aura lost its golden luster, turning ragged, hollow, and weak. The Pack magic had judged him guilty of treason against his own bloodline, and it was stripping him of his absolute dominance. Elara, however, stood taller. As the bond severed, the energy that violently left Valerius rushed into the void within her. Her amber eyes glowed with a terrifying luminescent gold. Her white wolf was awake. She was no longer just a Luna tied to an Alpha. She was a sovereign wolf, unbound, untouchable, and vastly powerful. She looked down at the ruined king, who was gasping on the floor, clutching his chest where his mate bond used to be. "Per the Writ of Severance under the law of false blood," Elara declared, her voice echoing with magical resonance, "I reclaim the eastern territories of the Winter Moon as my ancestral right. I claim half the royal treasury to be transported by Commander Gideon's men by nightfall. And I claim my freedom." Valerius looked up at her, tears of pure regret and physical agony streaming down his scarred face. "Elara, please. Without you, without the eastern borders, the Pack will fracture. The kingdom will fall." "Then let it fall," Elara said, turning her back on him for the final time. "A king must do what is best for his legacy, Valerius, and mine has just begun." She walked toward the heavy oak doors. Commander Gideon fell into step behind her, followed by her elite guards. As Elara passed the trembling lords of the Northern Territories, every single one of them lowered their heads, bowing deeply not to the Alpha King writhing on the floor, but to the true queen who had just conquered the room without drawing a single blade. The storm outside had broken, and the reign of the Mistress was over. But for Queen Elara, the sun was just beginning to rise. A crown can be stolen, but a true queen is revealed by the dignity no one could take from her. Do you think she made the right choice, leaving the Alpha King with nothing? If you enjoy emotional Alpha King stories about rejected mates, hidden truths, and queens rising from pain, subscribe and come back for the next story.